Terry? Josh Frydenberg up late at night worried about his surplus?
Well, you have to be careful of taking what economists say too literally. We always beware of the economists. Isn't that right, Adam?
No, that's definitely true, definitely.
But yes, obviously it's going to take a hit, and when Josh unveiled his surplus in December in the mid-year update, I said then, don't actually count your surplus till it arrives, Josh, because things happen, events.
Yes, events, dear boy.
Events. So obviously it's now a question mark, but at the end of the day, whether it's a $5 billion surplus or a $5 billion deficit, and I think we're going to agree, Adam, it's no big deal. You know,
That's right.
What matters is Wayne Swan $40 billion deficits from here to the rest of time.
I reckon, you know, Josh Frydenberg would have to be the Parliament's most ambitious treasurer, and there's been a few in recent times. But clearly, you know, if anyone can pull out some savings if required to resurrect a surplus, it'll be Josh. He's not going to want it on his watch that he printed the T-shirts last year, back in black, to find he can't deliver a few months later.
Yeah, certainly, Peter. Josh is a very ambitious treasurer, there's no doubt about that. But sometimes I do fear that his ambition kind of gets the better of him in a policy sense, because he focuses so much on the politics and not the policy. I think the government generally focuses too much on this surplus, and it kind of sucks up oxygen that really should be spent talking about other things. Just as Terry said, look, it's just a rounding error, whether it's a surplus or a deficit. The reality is, I'd much rather see the government be pursuing tax reform than trying to squeeze out a surplus for, let's face it, what are purely political reasons. I might add though.
Yeah, I think just on that though, I think
sure.
the political shorthand of a surplus in the community. A surplus is one thing that cuts through. People understand what it's like to have a little bit of money left over at the end of the month, just like the government's saying at the end of the year we've got more money coming in than we've got going out. And I think that's where the shorthand applies to the economic credentials of the coalition. I think that's why they're repeating that message. And I think highlighting the Wayne Swan story, led now by his former Chief of Staff as Labor's frontman.
And expectations.
Yes.
Peter, so
certainly.
having promised a surplus and coming out with a deficit, we'll go, where are we headed? That sort of.
The only thing that I'd very briefly say there is certainly a surplus resonates with people, just as you said, Peter, but I don't think many people realise that the surplus is really being achieved through ever higher taxation. The tax share of GDP is actually the highest it's ever been in a decade. So really it's just bracket creep.
Adam, they'd feel that, wouldn't they?
Well, yeah. Well, they don't, because of money illusion, right? They don't. Most people don't understand, kind of how bracket creep works. But the reality is, it's just silent taxation, which has enabled the government to have a small surplus, even if it's that.
All right, let's talk house prices, because the news out is that Australia's house prices, house mortgages, are moving at faster pace than they have in the last 3 years. Total value of housing loan approvals, I'm told, surging 4.4%, more than double the 1.6%. Again, economists, Terry, those economists have anticipated. Are they on the money?
Well, obviously those rate cuts work. I mean, particularly in the housing market, they mightn't work so effectively in the broader economy in terms of creating jobs, activity, spending and so on, but they've certainly had a big impact on the property market, and that reality is playing out. I don't think it's a great thing that we've come out with this. The minimum mortgage, the average mortgage now is over $500,000. I mean, that's extraordinary in terms of relating that to the incomes of particularly people in their 20s trying to get their first home.
And what do you make of it all, Adam? Because I mean, the one thing that hasn't changed, although coronavirus might take a hit to visa numbers, but of course, with more and more Australians or more and more people turning up on Australia's shores, they've got to buy a home.
Yeah, look, certainly superficially I think the housing figures are good, but I do worry longer term that we rely too much on the housing market generally to sustain our economy. The sugar hit of those 3 interest rate cuts last year will almost certainly wear off. It's not a surprise to me that you've seen a boost in lending, that we're seeing a boost in house prices. That's probably the number one lesson of the last decade around the world in economics, is that when you cut the cash rate, you get higher house prices and more borrowing. But the problem is that in a year or two, those house prices will start to move sideways and maybe start to fall, and then of course there's no more ammunition. So I do worry that we just kind of rely on this process of bidding up credit, bidding up house prices, but at some point there'll be no way to cut rates further.
You're a Victorian, a proud Victorian, and we all held our breath over summer that the power might fall away because of all these issues with Hazelwood and of course, the whole Latrobe Valley no longer being the sort of the power source it was for Victoria. Interestingly, the other day, in a parliamentary committee submission, the CFMEU, and who would have thought I'd be quoting the CFMEU, CFMEU now, it's the merged entity, really calling out the government, the Andrews government here, for not investing in high efficiency, low emissions coal-fired power, but also not having a national debate about nuclear, and a rational debate. Now, surely we can do both.
Well, let's be thankful for small mercies, Peter. We've got at least some theoretical sanity on the left, a union, a prominent union, calling for a rational approach to energy, because we need either or both. I mean, it's just mind-bogglingly insane that we can't even accept this generally across the community, generally across politics. We've got to have new coal-fired power stations, the most efficient new form, or nuclear, or both. The idea that we can continue to pump more and more, pump is hardly the right word, pump more and more wind energy into the system and a little bit of solar is just so insane. So good on the CMFU. They want to have jobs, they want to have real power, and I would hope that that sanity might spread more widely across the Labor Party.
Adam, last night I had one of your colleagues from the Australian, Graham Lloyd, on, and he had released information of 174 countries that were signatory to the Paris Agreement. Only 3, so 171, had failed to meet the latest deadline. Now, this is despite Australia being held up as the global pariah over the summer bushfire season. It seems that everybody else is saying one thing at these international talk fests and doing something completely the opposite.
Well, certainly, just like the surplus, I guess. I think we talk about the Paris Accord way too much, but as you say, so few countries actually abide by the rules, and these things can never be enforced anyway. And from what I understand, although it's very confusing, I think we're already meeting our targets anyway, whether we are in the Paris Accord or out of it. So I think we should be talking more about the energy mix here, certainly as we were just doing, and such a wonderful thing that elements of the union movement really are coming on board and being more sensible kind of about the energy mix. And it's not just them. I really feel as though in Australia in the past couple of years the debate is really changing. It's slowly shifting toward nuclear, and I'd be surprised in 5 to 10 years' time if we still have that ban on nuclear energy in this country, because of course we are the only country in the G20 to have it. It's very crazy to have it, and I think we're shifting.
Oh, gee, I could bet you a good bottle of wine that we'll still have it. I'm sorry to say, Adam. As crazy as we are to have it, I think that I would win that bet, sadly.
Okay.
Just before we go, I want to talk about submarines. But Robert Gottliebsen, terrific story the other day, that Australia was warned, basically, this is the Malcolm Turnbull submarine plan, not so much the Abbott one.
Malcolm and Christopher Pyne.
And Christopher Pyne, and Malcolm of the NBN, and Malcolm of the Murray-Darling Basin. Gee, he's had a trifecta of wins there. But on the issue of submarines, warned that what was being proposed was risky. But also the numbers, Terry, $220 billion is now the submarine spend.
220. We thought we were going crazy with the NBN, $50 to $100 billion. $220 billion on submarines that nobody knows if they will actually work, because they've got to be reinvented. Just make a very quick...
And that's because they were nuclear submarines.
They were nuclear. They're
now being made conventional submarines, of which the French company that's building them has never done before.
Exactly.
In history.
Very quickly, Peter, I will predict these submarines will never enter service. And it's one of those long-term predictions you can make safely, because they're coming for 10 years to 25 years. So I can happily predict we will never see those submarines in an Australian port.
All right, there you go tonight. At home, write that down. Peta Credlin says they won't change nuclear in 5 years. Adam says they do, and Terry says they'll no, we won't get anything for our $220 billion.